Blood pooled beneath his trembling hand, mixing with mud and rain on the cold Italian soil. Lieutenant Marcus Cole pressed his palm against the gaping wound in his side, knowing he had minutes, maybe less. But it wasn't death that terrified him. It was the message that would die with him. 47 American soldiers were walking into a trap. The German ambush waited just beyond the ridge. Machine guns positioned perfectly, mortars zeroed in. Intel had reached him too late. Radio destroyed. No way to warn them. Unless he dipped his finger into his own blood. War makes artists of desperate men. Marcus began to write on the only canvas he had left, the white medical bandage torn from his pack. Each letter cost him precious seconds, precious blood. His vision blurred, but his hand kept moving. The message had to be clear, had to be found. Ambush North Ridge. 47 men. Go east through valley. His body was failing, but his mind raced with memories. Sarah's laugh, his mother's apple pie, the promise he'd made to bring his men home. Promises that would be broken if this message failed. The irony wasn't lost on him, using his death to prevent others. Footsteps. American boots, thank God. He could hear Sergeant Williams calling his name, getting closer. With his last strength, Marcus raised the blood-soaked bandage high, ensuring it would be seen. The world tilted. Darkness crept in from the edges. Williams found him propped against a tree, eyes already vacant but arms still raised like a macabre flag. The sergeant's hand shook as he read the crimson words. Without hesitation, he redirected the patrol east. They'd learn later that the ambush Marcus warned about would have been total annihilation. That bandage now sits in a small museum in Ohio, the blood long faded to brown, the fabric yellowed with age. Visitors pass by, most never knowing that those 8 words, written in a dying man's blood, brought 47 soldiers home to their families. Marcus Cole was 23 when he learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action despite terror consuming every cell in your body. Before Italy, before the blood and the message, he was just another kid from Cincinnati who'd never traveled further than Columbus. Pearl Harbor changed everything. Like millions of young Americans, Marcus felt the surge of patriotic fury. He enlisted 3 days after the attack, standing in line with his best friend Tommy, both convinced they'd be home by Christmas. They were wrong. Tommy never made it past Normandy. Marcus carried that weight through France, through Belgium, and finally to Italy. The Italian campaign was hell-dressed in beautiful scenery. Mountains that touched heaven became killing fields. Ancient villages turned into tombstones. The Germans had turned retreat into an art form, leaving behind booby traps, blown bridges, and death at every turn. They knew the terrain. They'd had months to prepare. Marcus had been promoted to lieutenant after his captain caught a sniper's bullet in his throat. Leadership wasn't something he'd sought. It was thrust upon him like an ill-fitting uniform. Suddenly, 47 lives depended on his decisions. Boys who wrote letters home to girlfriends they'd marry if they survived, men who carried photos of children they'd never met. He learned their names, their fears, their dreams. Private Johnson wanted to open a car repair shop. Corporal Martinez dreamed of teaching history. Sergeant Williams had 6 kids waiting in Alabama. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were his responsibility, his family forged in foxholes and firefights. The intelligence about the ambush came from a dying German soldier gasping out a warning in broken English. Maybe conscience finally won. Maybe he just wanted to confess before meeting his maker. Marcus didn't care about his motivations. He only cared about the coordinates the man whispered through blood-bubbled lips. But war is chaos wearing a uniform. The communication lines were cut, radio equipment smashed by artillery. The fastest runner in the unit was 2 miles away. There was no time. The patrol would march straight into death's embrace in less than 20 minutes. Unless someone warned them. The shrapnel that tore through Marcus's side came from a landmine he'd triggered while running to intercept the patrol. The cruel comedy of war, wounded while trying to prevent wounds. The metal fragments had carved through muscle and organs with surgical precision. He could feel his life draining with each heartbeat. Most men would have sought help, crawled toward the medical station just a quarter-mile back. Self-preservation is humanity's most basic instinct, but Marcus understood mathematics colder than any equation he'd learned in school. 1 life versus 47. The calculation was simple. The choice was not. He'd seen men die before. watched the light fade from their eyes like dimming lanterns. Some went peacefully, calling for mothers who'd never hold them again. Others raged against the dying light, cursing God, the war, the very air they could no longer breathe. Marcus had always wondered which type he'd be. Now he knew. He was neither. He was something else. A messenger. The human body can survive remarkable trauma when the mind has purpose. Marcus channeled every ounce of remaining strength into his morbid canvas. The blood wasn't flowing fast enough. He pressed harder on the wound, using his own body as an inkwell. Each letter had to be large enough to read, clear enough to understand. No room for misinterpretation. Time became elastic. Seconds stretched into hours, or maybe hours compressed into heartbeats. He thought of his men, walking unknowingly toward their deaths. Johnson would be joking about his girl back home. Martinez would be quoting some obscure historical battle. Williams would be watching the tree line with those sharp Alabama eyes. The body has approximately 10 pints of blood. Marcus was using his like a finite resource, calculating how much each word would cost. He'd been good at math in school, never imagined he'd use it to budget his own blood. The message was almost complete, just needed to add the alternative route. His mother would be devastated. She'd already lost one son to the Pacific. Now she'd lose another to Italy. But 47 other mothers would keep their sons. The arithmetic of sacrifice. The economics of war. He finished the last letter as his vision began to tunnel. Now he just had to make sure it would be found. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. For Marcus, it was more specific. He saw every face of every man he'd led, every decision that had kept them alive until now. The time he'd ordered them to dig in despite exhaustion, minutes before artillery rained down. The gut feeling that made him change their route through a village, avoiding a German patrol, but mostly, he saw their trust. Trust is the currency of combat, more valuable than ammunition, more precious than rations. His men trusted him to read maps in the dark, to hear danger in the silence, to make impossible choices. That trust was about to be tested one final time. They'd have to trust a message written in blood over their planned route. The human mind performs miracles when death approaches. Marcus could suddenly remember things with crystalline clarity. His father teaching him to tie knots. Make it tight, son. Sometimes your life depends on a good knot. He'd been talking about sailing. The lesson applied differently now. He used his belt to secure the bandage to his wrist, knotting it with fingers already going numb. Even if his arm fell when he died, the message would remain visible. A macabre flag of warning. A banner of sacrifice. The knot would hold. His father would be proud. Strange thoughts drift through a dying mind. Marcus wondered if blood could be considered art. Cave painters used ochre and charcoal. He was using iron and plasma, both trying to communicate across time, to leave meaning in a meaningless world. His would just have a more immediate audience. The forest around him was beautifully indifferent to his sacrifice. Birds sang despite the distant artillery. Sunlight filtered through leaves, creating patterns that would have delighted a painter. Italy's beauty made its violence more obscene. Paradise corrupted into purgatory. He could hear them now. American voices carried on the wind. They were early, or maybe he'd lost more time than he thought. Consciousness was becoming negotiable, sliding in and out like a broken radio frequency. He had to stay awake, had to ensure they saw, had to make his death matter. Sergeant Williams had seen enough death to recognize its approach from a distance. The way a body slumps when the spirit starts its departure, the particular stillness that separates the dying from the dead. When he saw Lieutenant Cole propped against that tree, arm raised like a grim salute, his first thought was to check for a pulse. Then he saw the bandage. Blood makes a poor ink. It clots, it smears, it fades. But desperation makes an excellent preservative. Marcus had written with the careful precision of someone who knew they'd have no chance for revision. Each letter carved into fabric with finger and will. Williams read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Ambush, North Ridge, the exact route they'd planned to take. How Cole knew, Williams couldn't fathom. But he'd learned to trust the lieutenant's instincts even now. Especially now. The discussion was brief. Some men wanted to continue as planned. Could be delirium, Private Johnson argued, but Williams had seen Cole's eyes. Even clouded by death, they held clarity. Purpose. the kind of focus that cuts through pain and fear to find truth. They went east through the valley. The detour added 2 hours to their march. 2 hours of doubt, of second-guessing, of wondering if they were honoring a dying man's hallucination. Then they heard it. The distinctive crack of German 88s firing from the North Ridge, mortars falling exactly where they would have been. The symphony of an ambush catching only air. Later reconnaissance would confirm what Marcus had somehow known. 3 machine gun nests, 2 mortar positions, enough firepower to turn a patrol into a memory. The Germans had waited 6 hours before abandoning their positions, confused why the Americans never appeared. 47 men stood in silent formation when they returned to find Cole's body. He'd been dead for hours, but his arm had remained raised, the belt holding his message high. Williams cut the bandage free with the reverence of a priest handling scripture. This wasn't just fabric anymore. It was testament. Word of the blood message spread through the division like wildfire. Soldiers who'd never met Marcus Cole knew his name. The story grew in the telling, as war stories do. But the core remained unchanged, a dying officer who used his last moments, his last blood to save his men. Command wanted to investigate. How had Lieutenant Cole known about the ambush? Who was his source? The machinery of military bureaucracy ground forward, seeking logical explanations for an illogical war. They interviewed every member of the patrol, mapped every possible intelligence leak. The dying German soldier was never found. Perhaps he'd crawled away to die alone. Perhaps he'd never existed except in Marcus's final report. Some suggested Cole had spotted the ambush himself while on reconnaissance. Others believed he'd intercepted enemy communications. The truth died with him, but truth and meaning aren't always companions. The bandage was sent to division headquarters as evidence. A colonel, whose own son served in the Pacific, stared at the brown-stained fabric for a long moment. Then he ordered it preserved and sent home with Cole's personal effects. Some things transcended military protocol. Sarah received the telegram on a Tuesday. She'd been hanging laundry, humming a song they'd danced to at their engagement party. The Western Union boy couldn't meet her eyes. She knew before reading. The knowing didn't make it easier. Nothing could make it easier. The letter that followed, written by Sergeant Williams, told her about the bandage, about the message, about the 47 men who lived because Marcus died. She read it 17 times that first day. Then she put it away. Some pain is too pure to revisit regularly. Marcus's mother aged a decade in a week. She'd lost 2 sons to wars on opposite sides of the world. The mathematics of grief don't follow normal rules. 2 losses don't equal double the pain. They equal an emptiness that expands beyond calculation. But Williams had included something else in his letter. A photograph of the patrol, taken after they'd returned safely. 47 faces, young and alive and grateful. On the back, each man had signed his name. Below the signatures, Williams had written, "He brought us home." The bandage arrived in Cincinnati 6 weeks later, carefully wrapped in military documentation. Sarah held it with trembling hands, this fabric that held her fiancé's last words. The blood had dried to rust brown, but the message remained legible. A love letter written to life itself. She could have kept it private, locked it away with his letters and photographs. Grief often demands solitude, but something in those faded words called for witness. Marcus had made his death public through necessity. Perhaps his message deserved the same. The local newspaper ran the story. A small piece at first, buried on page 6. But something about it resonated. A mother clipped it and sent it to her son in the Pacific. A father read it aloud at the factory where he built bombers. The story spread like Marcus's blood had spread. Slowly at first, then with purpose. The families of the 47 men reached out. Letters arrived from Alabama, Texas, New York, California. Mothers writing to thank a mother who'd lost everything. Wives grateful to a fiancé who'd never be a wife. Children who would know their fathers because of a message written in blood. Johnson made it home to open his garage. He named it Cole's Auto Repair. Martinez became that history teacher, starting every semester with the story of Lieutenant Cole. Williams raised his 6 kids and 2 more he adopted, orphans of the war. Each life saved created ripples, expanding outward through time. The War Department wanted to award Marcus the Medal of Honor. The review board struggled with precedent. He hadn't charged a machine gun or thrown himself on a grenade, he'd simply bled with purpose. How do you measure such sacrifice against traditional heroism? They settled on the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for his own safety. Bureaucratic language trying to capture something beyond words. Sarah accepted it on a stage while cameras clicked and dignitaries spoke of valor. She donated it to the local museum the next day along with the bandage. Not from lack of love, but from abundance of it. Marcus had never cared about medals. He'd cared about his men. The display case that holds both items bears a simple placard, "Greater love hath no man than this." Time has a way of smoothing sharp edges. The veterans of that patrol grew old, their memories of war fading like photographs left in sunlight, but the blood message remained vivid. At reunions, they'd gather around Williams as he retold the story, each man adding details, correcting chronology, keeping the memory alive through repetition. In 1962, Johnson's son enlisted, heading to a different jungle war. Johnson gave him a photograph of the bandage. "Remember this," he said. "Leadership isn't about glory, it's about bringing everyone home." The boy carried that photo through 2 tours in Vietnam. Martinez incorporated the story into his lesson plans. Thousands of students learned about sacrifice through Marcus Cole's final act. Some went on to military service. Others to teaching, medicine, public service. All carrying the seed of an idea that individual choices matter, that one person can change the arithmetic of fate. The museum in Ohio became an accidental pilgrimage site. Veterans would arrive unannounced, standing before the display case in silence. Widows brought grandchildren, pointing to the faded words. "This is why you're here," they'd whisper. "Because someone chose others over himself." A psychology professor studied the message, analyzing how extreme stress affects decision-making. He concluded that Cole's choice represented the highest form of human cognition, abstract reasoning overcoming base survival instinct. His paper was titled The Calculus of Sacrifice, but those who knew Marcus would have laughed at such academic language. He wasn't calculating anything complex. The math was simple. 47 is greater than 1. Any third grader could solve that equation. The difficulty was in becoming the one. Sarah never remarried, not from loyalty to the dead, but from the impossibility of explaining such love to the living. How do you date when your heart belongs to someone who wrote his last words in blood? She became a nurse instead, saving lives in a different way. She'd visit the museum monthly, always alone, always at closing time. The security guard, a veteran himself, would let her stay past hours. She'd stand before the case, not speaking, not crying, just being present with the last physical evidence of Marcus's choice. Wars end. Soldiers return. Life continues its relentless march forward. By the 1980s, World War II was becoming history rather than memory. The men of Marcus's patrol were grandfathers now, their war stories competing with television for attention. But something unexpected happened. A filmmaker researching a documentary about forgotten heroes stumbled across the blood message. He'd been looking for dramatic stories, expecting to find tales of combat and conquest. Instead, he found something quieter and more profound. The documentary aired nationally. Suddenly, Marcus Cole's sacrifice reached audiences who hadn't been born when he died. Letters poured into the museum. Teachers requested copies for classrooms. Military academies added the story to leadership curricula. A young soldier in Iraq, facing his own impossible situation, remembered the story from training. Surrounded and outnumbered, he chose to expose himself to enemy fire to mark targets for air support. His sacrifice saved his entire squad. In his pocket, they found a printed email about Marcus Cole. The message had transcended its original purpose. No longer just a warning about one ambush, it became a testament to the idea that individual actions echo through eternity, that choosing others over self is the highest form of human expression. Williams, the last survivor of the original patrol, was invited to speak at West Point. 93 years old, hands shaking with Parkinson's, voice barely above a whisper. But when he described finding Cole's body, that raised arm holding its crimson banner, the auditorium fell silent. He could have tried to save himself, Williams said. Could have crawled to aid, could have thought only of his own pain. But leadership, real leadership, is measured in what you do when no one's watching and you're running out of time. A cadet asked how Cole had found the strength. Williams smiled, the expression transforming his aged face. Same place we all find it, he said. In remembering that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, that our lives are threads in a tapestry we can't see completely. The museum expanded its exhibit. Added context, photographs, letters from the saved men, but the centerpiece remained unchanged. A simple bandage, stained brown with old blood, bearing 8 words that brought 47 men home. Today that bandage still hangs in its climate-controlled case. The blood has faded to the color of autumn leaves. The fabric shows its age. But the message endures, as clear as the moment Marcus pressed his finger to cloth and chose meaning over survival. Visitors often ask why it matters. Why preserve such a grim reminder? In an age of instant communication, what relevance does a blood-written warning have? The museum guide, often a veteran, always gives the same answer, because it reminds us what one person can do when it matters most. The arithmetic remains unchanged, 1 life for 47. But the equation has expanded. Those 47 men had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Johnson's garage employed hundreds over the years. Martinez taught thousands. Williams's extended family now numbers in the dozens. The ripples continue spreading. A general recently visited, standing before the case with his aide. "Calculate the impact," he ordered. The aide, misunderstanding, began estimating economic value, demographic projections. The general stopped him. "Not numbers," he said. "Meaning. Calculate the meaning of choosing others when you could choose yourself. There is no algorithm for such calculation. No spreadsheet that captures the weight of sacrifice. But every person who stands before that bandage understands intuitively. We are capable of transcending our own survival. We can choose purpose over preservation. We can make our deaths speak when our voices fail." Marcus Cole died alone against a tree in Italy, his blood forming words instead of pooling uselessly in foreign soil. But he didn't die meaninglessly. He died as he lived, thinking of his men, solving problems, finding ways to bring them home. The message written in blood saved thousands. Not just the 47 who avoided the ambush, but everyone they touched, everyone their lives made possible. A geometric progression of existence, all traceable to 8 words and 1 choice. Some say heroes are born, others say they're made. The truth is simpler. Heroes are those who, in the moment of decision, calculate the odds and choose others anyway, who write messages in blood when ink isn't available, who raise their arms high so others might see, even as their own light fades. We live in a world that often celebrates the wrong arithmetic, individual gain over collective good, personal comfort over shared sacrifice. But in a museum in Ohio, a blood-stained bandage reminds us of different math, the kind where 1 equals 47, where death equals life, where the end becomes a beginning. Remember this story. Share it. Because somewhere, someone will face their own impossible moment. They'll have seconds to decide, resources running out, choices that seem to offer only loss. In that moment, they might remember a lieutenant who did the math and found that saving others multiplied his meaning beyond measure. Like this video if it moved you. Subscribe to hear more stories of those who calculated courage when the odds demanded cowardice. Share your own stories of sacrifice in the comments below, whether from your family's military history or everyday heroes who chose others over themselves. This channel exists for those who believe history isn't just about dates and battles, but about individual moments when someone decides that love is stronger than death, that purpose transcends pain, and that sometimes the most powerful message we can leave is written in the very essence of who we are.